So the headline read, here you go. Are you ready? The headline read, Girl kills man who enslaved her when he tried to abduct her again and make her his white slave. So that is the headline that I saw, and I was like, "Oh, what? What?" So today's case, we're looking at a young woman whose parents were Italian immigrants, but I think she was actually born in the United States. And she ended up killing a man who had a connection to her. She felt like he was trying to kidnap her or something like that. And so she killed him in broad daylight. In fact, after she shot him the first time he took off running, she chased him down the road and made sure to actually kill him. And she was only 18 years old at the time when she committed this murder. So this case is important because we get to see how the immigrants were treated. So in the late 1800s, early 1900s, millions and millions of immigrants came to the United States from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe. These immigrants were different from the immigrants that had came to the United States prior. These immigrants were predominantly Italian, Irish, and did not speak English and were Catholic. And so they were very different from the makeup of the United States that people living in America preferred come to the United States. So these were a whole different group coming over to the United States that would have a massive impact on the culture of the United States. And so today we're going to be looking at how they were treated based on this case. This case reveals a lot of issues that a lot of these immigrants had coming over at this time period. And if you didn't know, this is also the time period where Donald Trump's family comes over to the United States as well, as part of that German group that came over. And so this is a historically important time period, but you will get to see that even though they were white, a lot of the immigrants were not treated very well. And this case kind of exposes how they were treated during this time period. Hello, I am Angela. I am a historian / history teacher, and I like to use murder cases to help people better understand history. Oftentimes, these cases, once you start doing research, expose and reflect a lot of larger problems that were happening in the United States at the time. So, if you like this type of content, please subscribe and like this video for me. So today's case involves a young woman. Her nickname was Mamie, but her real name, because she's Italian, was Concetina, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce her last name. Well, let me try for the video to at least pronounce her last name, and I apologize if I mispronounce it. I am horrible with names. So it's Concetina Provenzane, something to that effect. Once again, I apologize, and I always put the full name and information of where I got the story and stuff in the description if you just want to go down there. But for this video, I'm actually going to be referring to her as Mamie, which is the name that she gave to the police officers and to the newspapers and everyone covering her story. She did not use her real name. So this incident happens in New York City. And essentially what happens is we have a young girl of Italian descent. She is working because at this time there's child labor, and child labor is widespread, and you really see it with immigrant children all being forced to work in factories and things like that. So at this time, a lot of the young girls whose parents were immigrants and things like that, they would work in textiles. They would be sewing clothing and things like this. And that is what Mamie was doing. She worked for a tailor company, and she got hired there at a very young age. She might have been 14 or so when she got hired there. So she was there, and then this other person got hired a man who's 12 years older than her, and his name is Mariano. So Mariano gets hired at the same place, and they start liking each other. Problem is, Mariano is married with 2 children, and this Mamie is only 15 at this time, but they somehow start a relationship, and they are together and they see each other. And when she is around 15 or 16, he takes her away, and I don't know if he actually got a divorce or if he was even married to his first wife, but he takes Mammy away and they go get married and they live their life. And so he takes her, they get married, they live their life, and 3 months later she's like, I don't like this, I want to go back home. And she goes back home to her father. Her father is pissed that this grown man who is close to 30 at this time has abducted his daughter. That's what he told the police, and kept her for 3 months, even though she is legally a child. So Mamie's father goes and press charges of abduction on Mariano and was like, he abducted my child. He kept her away for 3 months, had sex with her, even though the case doesn't really, you have to understand the time period. This is, I believe, the 1920s. During this time, the newspapers were very conservative in what they could write and what was seen as acceptable to print in a newspaper. And printing that a man had sex with a minor, they didn't really go into it. They didn't print it. That's all I can say. They didn't really print it. It's just implied. So the father goes to the police station and has charges brought against Mariano. And basically, the police don't do anything, and they let him out. They let him completely go for free, right? So he's gone. So the police did not press charges. They didn't do anything about this man taking this young girl. And this really goes into the immigrant experience at the time and the fact that they cannot rely on the police to get justice. And oftentimes the police would dismiss them as, that's what you guys do. You're immigrants. You're from this country, and you all your women get pregnant when they're young. It's just what y'all do. Don't come bother us. That is the vibe. That is the stance that oftentimes police would take with immigrants or people of immigrant descent. And that's because it reflects a anger at the time between immigrants and people who were native born in the United States. And we were having this nativist movement at the time. And so when you look at how the police treated her father and were really not trying to help the situation whatsoever, despite the fact that she was a minor, despite the fact that he took her and he was already married, and despite the fact that he would not let her leave the home once he had her. In today's time, this man would be going to jail. Back then, they were like, nothing we can do, sorry about it, and that's it. So what ends up happening is the father sends his daughter to go live with her uncle, and everything's fine. Now, there is a little bit of confusion in this story that I was trying to clarify. I really couldn't get. And the problem was Mamie's account of what happened versus her father is kind of, it's two different stories. So she was either living with him after they ran off for 3 months or a year. But essentially what ends up happening is that you have them together for like a year or so. Then she comes back home and we have a situation where she's living with her uncle for another year. So she's living with her uncle, living her best life for another year, and her husband tracks her down. He somehow finds her, which is weird because even the father was like, this man has not even tried to contact us in a year, and we're just shocked that he was able to find her. But he found her, and he was stalking her, and he would watch her walk to work, so he knew where she worked. He knew her route, everything. So one day as she's walking to work, she starts feeling weird. She's like, I feel like someone's watching me. Like she feels weird. She sees kind of some random guy she doesn't know kind of staring at her and stuff like that. But she goes to work and everything's fine. After work, she decides to go get her a gun, a pistol, so that next time when she's walking to work, she'll have this gun because she doesn't feel safe. She feels like something is weird. She goes and gets a gun. Now, I don't know at this time. This is New York City. Today, New York City has some of the strongest gun laws and make it very difficult to have a gun. But back then, it seems like you could just go get a gun if you want. And so she gets a gun. The next day, she's walking to work. And sure enough, her husband comes out of nowhere with another guy and tries to grab her and take her away. So he grabs her. She's like, get away from me. Leave me alone. They're scuffling, going back and forth. She pulls out the gun and she shoots. I believe the first shot she does hit him, but doesn't. It's not a wound that he would die from. But he's like, oh my God, she's got a gun. So then he takes off running. He's running for his life. And she is chasing him with the gun. And she catches him and she shoots him a couple more times. And she thinks he's dead. Well, he's not exactly dead. The police come because they're out here shooting broad daylight, which has kind of been a theme. If you look at some of my other videos, women will just in broad daylight with a gun just start shooting people. This has actually been a trend. I guess it's because they want to be able to see what they're looking at. But in this case, it doesn't seem like she had planned it. She was just kind of protecting herself and she thought something was going on. So it's broad daylight. She kills. Everyone knows what happened. They arrest her. They take him to the hospital. And here's why the story is so confusing with these very different versions of what happened. They get Mariano into the hospital. The police are there and the police ask him straight out, what happened? Why did she shoot you? And this man says nothing. Nothing. He doesn't say, oh, she's my wife and I was just trying to come get her and return her because she ran away. He refuses to speak at all. He will not say why this girl shot him. He refuses to speak. And they believe he refused to speak because he thought he was going to live. He honestly thought, okay, I'm going to live. I'm not that bad. So he doesn't say anything. Problem is, he ends up dying fairly quickly after that. So he ends up dying. The police arrest Mamie. They ask her what happened. So this is her version that she tells the police that the police wrote it down. The newspapers got a hold of it. This is her version. He kidnapped me, made me live with him. When I tried to leave and come home, he stopped me. As we're living together, I'm the only one working, and he's forcing me to work. He's forcing me to do everything, and he does nothing but lives off of me. And then he wanted to kidnap a baby from a rich neighborhood. He wanted me to help him do it so that we could have the baby, get the baby for a ransom. The parents would pay the ransom, and then they would have a lot of money to go do whatever they needed to do. So Mamie looked at this crazy man and was like, oh God, he really is crazy and kind of stupid. I need to get out of here. He wouldn't let her leave, according to her. And eventually she broke away and got out of there. So she leaves him. She returns back to her parents' house. And then from her parents' house, she went and lived with her uncle and was getting her life back together. She had a job. She was saving money. Her life was good. She then says that Mariano with a friend, and that's who she was seeing the couple of days before they actually attempted to grab her. She was seen Mariano's friend, who was kind of looking at her and watching her and made her uncomfortable, but she didn't see him, but he was in the vicinity. So she said on her way to work, she felt awkward. She felt like something wasn't right. So she got the gun. And so happens the next day, as she's walking to work, that is when Mariano and his friend approach her and try to grab her and take her back. And what she said to the police was he wanted to have a white slavery. Now, let me show you so let me make sure this is right, because this is direct testimony from the police station about what was going on. It says, after living a proper life in Auburn, New York, the man came and tried to force her to become a white slave again. So they're touching on slavery and things like that. But that's what she felt like she was. She was doing all the working, she was paying all the bills, and he was just taking advantage of her. So she tells the police, he tried to make me a white slave. He tried to take me back there. I did not want to go, and I feared for my life. So that is her story to the police. And that is the story. That the problem is, because Mariano didn't say anything, that is what the police had to go on. The police had to go on that they were trying to kidnap her again. She leaves out, when talking to the police, that they ran off and got married and that she willingly went with him. That's the part that is left out. So she created a whole new narrative. She said, I'm just this young girl living my life, and this man kidnapped me, forced me to work, kept me away from my family, and that's her story. The problem is the reporters go and speak to her father, and it is not how that happened. She willingly ran away with this man. She willingly stayed with him. And when she got tired of him, she came back. But the story just doesn't. So basically, that's her story. Her father gives more information and starts putting together that this wasn't some random man. From her account from the police station, you think, oh, this is some random dude that kidnapped this poor girl when she was a teenager and he was in his late 20s, about to be 30, kidnaps her and won't let her go. The father was like, no, they've known each other since she was 15. She appears to have willingly went with him. That's probably why the police were like, we're not going to press charges. And so they actually had a 3-year relationship where they knew each other. So it's kind of weird, her version of events, because her version makes it seem like she had never met this man before, that he kidnapped her, made her a white slave, and she was able to get free. Well, we now know that she knew this man since she was 15, that she willingly went with him to get married, and she just did not like the situation she was in, and perhaps he was trying to get her back, and she didn't want to go back. So there are some discrepancies between the two versions, her father's version versus hers, but essentially we do know that her husband was trying to get her back. Did she fear for her life? Is that why? Perhaps she did not want to go back. But essentially what happens with the case is she's acquitted. Mariano never said a word. He refused to speak. He refused to say what was happening. So all they could do was go with her version of events, which is this man kept me against my will. He then tried to kidnap me again. Also, what was different from her version of the events versus what was actually told was that there was another man there. But the man may have been helping Mamie and not be part of, and may not be with her husband. And that's the interesting part. Because initially Mamie said this other dude shot her husband, but she doesn't know who he is. When the police interviewed people around, they did say there was another guy there. So Mamie made it seem like the other guy was with her husband, but it could turn out to be that the other guy was with her and that they might have set the husband up in a way when he tried to come and get her. Because this does seem a little bit off because the husband found her and knew exactly where she was and knew exactly what her job was in a large city where he hadn't seen her or made contact with her or even knew who her family was. So the fact that her husband was able to track her down, and even the father in interview was like, we haven't talked to this man in over a year. We're not for sure how he even knew where she was to go even get her. And the mystery guy that was with the two who may have done the shots, no one can find him. No one knows who he is or what is going on. And it just all seemed very convoluted to this whole situation. Like, who was the guy with? Was he with Mariano or was he with the girl? And how did Mariano find her? This is the early 1900s. This is not, you can't just go to Google and look at people's Facebook and social media to find them. How would he randomly know where she lived, where she went? It's been a year. He has no contact with her family. Her family has made it very clear, we will put you in jail if we ever catch you. So how would he randomly know where she is, what town she's in, her route to work, everything? How would he know any of this stuff? What I think, and to be honest, I think this was a setup. I think it was a setup by this young girl. I think she perhaps wanted to get married, and maybe her marriage to Mariano was legal and he was not divorcing her. Because divorce laws at this time, basically at this time, the United States wanted you to stay married. New York, places all over wanted you to stay married. And so they would oftentimes make it very difficult for you to get a divorce. So I honestly see this young girl attempting to get a divorce. She's met someone else and her husband is saying no. And so I know this might sound like a conspiracy theory, but this is what I think occurred. I think Mamie, who, as the newspaper actually printed this, is a very, very beautiful young girl. She is a beautiful young girl. She has been away from home. She lives with her uncle. She works. I think Mamie met someone else and she wanted to marry this other guy. And Mariano refused to give her divorce because the laws at the time were so strict about divorce, and it would be very difficult for her to do that. I think she met someone. I think she wanted a divorce. I think she knew her husband would never divorce her, and she wanted to marry this new guy. So she set him up. I believe 100% she let him know where she was. She let him know what her route was. And when he showed up, she had that gun and she was ready for him. Because it's just weird for you to randomly have a gun because you feel uncomfortable because someone's watching you. I think she would see him if he was watching her. I really do. I think she would have seen him if he was watching her. I think she had that gun ready and she had that man there who was really her companion. And as soon as they saw Mariano, she shot him and chased him down the road and made sure to kill him. This other guy's name was Mike, and he's mentioned multiple times in the police report. He is mentioned by eyewitnesses who said while she was running, chasing her husband and shooting at him, this other guy was with her as well and made no attempt to stop her. In fact, he might have even pulled the trigger himself, but he completely has disappeared. So I believe this was a setup. I believe she wanted to kill her husband. The problem is her husband didn't say anything. Her husband didn't say, oh, she told me where she was and that's why I showed up. He could have said that. He could have said all of that. And I think maybe he knew she set him up and he just wanted to protect her because he still loved her. So, whatever the case could be, like I said, in my heart, I feel like this is all a setup. I feel like her story and the fact that she's using these words, these very triggering words like white slave, enslavement, I broke free, and these types of terms, I think it was all a setup because she wanted a divorce. She wanted this man out of her life. And she most likely wanted to start a relationship with Mike, this Mike person that magically disappears after the killing is done. So, whatever the case, the problem with this situation is that the husband never tells his side of the story, and they're just going with Mamie's story. It does not even appear that the police might have interviewed the father. We do know that the father was interviewed by the reporters, and we could tell her story is a lot different than what her father's story is, because she presents the story as this random dude who forced her and enslaved her and forced her to work. The father's like, oh no, she's known him since she was 15. She ran away from him, with him. So, trial and punishment. So the investigation finds they can only go with her story, her account. People did see him coming up to her and trying to grab her. That kind of all coincides with what she said. And then, of course, she has her part of the story, and Mariano refuses to talk. So, the trial, what happened to her, and punishment. Have no clue. I think this is going to be a case where she probably will get away with it. I have seen that multiple times. She probably is going to get away with it. This is a time period where you're looking at, there was this thing that happened in the United States during this time period, the early 1900s. We see it with African Americans, and we also see it with immigrants that came over that weren't necessarily accepted by mainstream United States. And that is, the police kind of did nothing. It was like a murder it's happening in their community. That's just for them to handle. And so you do see the police kind of stepping back away from a lot of crimes. Example of this that I remember, I saw a movie about Little Richard, the famous rock and roll star, Little Richard. His father is shot and killed when he was at a bar and a woman was being assaulted, and the father stepped in. A woman was being assaulted by a man. The father steps in and tries to stop it from happening, and the man pulls out a gun and kills Little Richard's father. So the police come and they have the man in the back of the police car. And Little Richard comes to the scene, and he is yelling at the guy in the back of the police car, "Why would you kill my father? Why did you do this?" And Little Richard asks the police officer, "So what's going to happen to him?" And the police officer says, "Nothing. What? Why would we?" And the police officer says, "One black man killing another black man, that's nothing. That's less black people in the world. That's great for us." And he told Little Richard straight up, "We don't care when black on black crime happens. We don't give a shit as long as a black person isn't killing a white person. We're not going to punish this guy for killing a black man." And you could just see, like, Little Richard was just shocked. But that is the type of mentality that you would have oftentimes with immigrant groups. That is why a lot of them often would go and create gangs or mafia or whatever to get some type of justice. As we see in the Godfather movies, the man went to the Godfather because his daughter was brutally raped, and he wanted the man punished. He wanted the man killed for doing that to his daughter. And he went to the police, and the police are like, "Oh, well, there's not enough evidence and stuff." And then he went to the Godfather to actually get some type of punishment. And, you know, as sad as it seems, the law enforcement at the time, with a lot of these groups, these immigrant groups, there was a lot of racism towards them, didn't really care all that much. So that is something you also have to look into historically, is justice and dealing with the police, a lot of these groups would often avoid that because they felt like the police wasn't on their side or trying to help them at all. So you would see people getting vengeance and stuff themselves, or going to illegal organizations to kind of get justice for what is going on. But in this case, we see from early on when the father is trying to work with the police to get his daughter returned, to stop the situation, the police didn't do anything about it. I mean, even if she willingly went with this grown man, she is still a minor, and the police should have done something, but they stepped back and they just let it occur. And so with this case, if you guys do research and can figure out what happened, that would be great. My assumption, based on looking at other cases that are very similar, I think perhaps nothing really happened to this girl and that she got off scot-free. And it does seem a little suspect as you read into what happened. It does seem like this might have been a setup by this young woman to kill her husband so that she was free and could get married, because the laws on marriage at this time are very strict and it's very difficult to get a divorce, even if there's infidelity, which it doesn't appear to be any infidelity or anything. So that would mean it would be even harder for her to get a divorce. I think she was just trying to move on with her life, and this man, her husband, was making that difficult for her, and so she found a way out by just getting rid of him. Now, is this right or wrong? Who knows? But historically, we do see, when we're looking at these immigrant groups coming into the United States early on, there was a lot of discrimination. A lot of them took very low paying income jobs, and that sometimes when bad things would happen to this community, the police weren't necessarily all that gung-ho to go and try to straighten it out or try to bring some type of justice. And so in this case, whether she was kidnapped or not, or maybe she was trying to get her own justice, that's pretty much what happened. He dies. He never makes a statement to give his side of the story, and her story has a bunch of holes in it, and it contradicts what her father was saying. Her father seems to have a more accurate account of what happened, but we really don't know what happened, and I think the police probably bought what she was saying and let her off. So thank you for watching. Thank you for staying to the end, if you stayed to the end. And if you want to see more of my Women That Kill videos, you can check out my playlist. Other than that, I hope you have a wonderful day. Ciao, everyone.